Hello everyone, welcome back to the workshop. So in this video we're going to break this down old school style and do an old school tutorial on how to take and forge a ram's head. Now this is going to go into my animal head series that I already have. I have a playlist. It'll be linked up in the description down below, so be sure to check that out. You might see some things in this video that you don't see in the older videos that I've produced on this subject, and you might see some things as in the older videos that I don't do in this video. So it's worth to see how that process evolves over time. So very first thing that we're going to do with my talking hand video here, just like old school, we're going to talk about the tools that will be needed for the ram's head. The first thing that's going to be needed is a slitting chisel of some kind. This is a must-have tool in this process. Now, the next tool that's not a must-have but is a fun tool to have is an eyeball punch. I have a complete video series where I make a whole bunch of different figure carving tools, so be sure to check that out. Also linked up in the description. This is an eyeball punch. I've made the video on making that. And then, so that is an optional tool. It just helps make it a little more lifelike. If you don't have an eyeball punch and you just got a slitting chisel, then the next critical tool is a center punch. This is going to help drive in the pupils of my eyeball punch, but it can also be made, this is also going to help us with making the nostrils, and if you don't use an eyeball punch, you can use this to make your eyes as well. So we're going to start with a piece of 1/2-inch square bar. The length does not matter because we're going to focus on the very end here. And 1/2-inch square, that's 12.5 mil in metric. So 12.5 mil square in metric, that is what we're going to be working with in this project. The length, again, does not matter, just a comfortable length for you to hold. So without further ado, let's get this hot and we will forge the first step in this process. Okay, first things first, we're going to take about 1 inch of material or 25 mil of material and we're going to lay it on the anvil. We're going to use half on, half off blows. We're going to drive that material out. And this section is going to become our horns. We're aiming to make that inch of material or 25 mil of material about 2 inches long or 50 mil long before we put our taper on the end of it. So every time I'm coming back to this shoulder, I'm using half on, half off blows to continue to set that material down. Now we'll check that to see if I'm where I want to be. I'm dead on 2 inches. There you go. So that's where we need to be. So now we will go ahead and draw a taper into the end of this. This will help us out by putting a taper on this, starting to draw out a taper. This will help us get dead center with our chisel when we go to split these horns. And it will also give us that additional length we need in the horns as well. So let me get that hot again. There we have it. Now that has grown about an extra inch. You can make it extra 1.25 inches if you want to work out some of this additional thickness, but that is going to be plenty long enough for our ram's horns. Let's stick it back in the fire, and now we will move on to the splitting process. Okay, so I'm going to switch up to my soft face hammer. This is just a mild steel block that I put a hammer handle through. I'm using this to work with my slitting chisel here, which is actually hardened at both ends. So this helps for me to deform one tool and not both tools, on the ends here. So I could use multiple tools, the ends hold up, and I just mushroom out my hammer. So that's what I'm doing here, but we're gonna move on to the slitting chisel portion of this. So we're gonna come out with help of the blacksmith's third hand here. We're laying this with the shoulder facing up, and we're gonna start out at the very tip. We're gonna make a mark, and we wanna get that as dead center as we can. And we're gonna keep cutting back. I should also mention at this point, this whole piece is about 3/16 of an inch or so in thickness, and it's just a little over 3 inches long. I did take one heat off camera to just thin it a little bit, dress it, and lengthen it just slightly from what you've seen in the previous video clip. Now we're not going to split all the way at the anvil here before we put on a little splitting plate. So we don't damage the chisel. But ideally, what we're doing here is we're going to split nice dead even if we can, and then we're going to leave about a cube of material, or roughly a 1/2 inch square bit of material, to be able to fold back onto the parent bar stock. Using a cutting plate, this is just a bit of mild steel. We're going to cut clean down through the piece until these horns begin to split apart, just like so. I'll set this down, straighten those out, and this is why we tapered this to begin with. Now we don't have to spend a lot of time drawing out each one of these horns. And as far as the rag, we're going to leave that. That's going to help illustrate our twist later on when we twist these up to actually turn them into ram's horn. That's going to make it look a little bit nicer. Go ahead and get rid of that. Now we're ready to go ahead and bend this up. I'm going to kind of pop these closer back together. Not completely, but just to where they're in line. And now we're going to heat this up and bend it over the far edge of the anvil and back onto itself in preparation for our forge weld. Over the far edge of the anvil, we're going to control our bend. We're going to bend that back. That material that we left, we're going to bend it right back on itself and compress it. Bend these horns back so they stay out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and brush this real quick, get any excess scale out of my joint before I bend that all the way down. I'm going to drive her home where she's sitting nice and flush. You want your horns to be tucked in and protected by the bar, the mass of the parent bar back here. We're going to focus all of our welding energy and our heat. I'm going to grab Mr. Thing here. We're going to focus it all here in this roughly 5/8 inch of material, half inch by 5/8 or 12 mil by 16 mil of material. We are going to take and focus all of our energy just right in this area. So we really don't need these horns hot. We don't need all this material up at a blistering, bright white heat or a forge welding heat. We just need this in to weld up nicely. So that's where we're going to focus our efforts. With that being said, if you are a beginner at this, it is okay to use a little bit of flux at this point. And I emphasize a little. I'm talking a pinch of flux is all you need. Not a spoonful, not dipping it in the can, but a pinch of flux right on that seam it will wick through the joint with capillary action and it will clean that joint. This is a simple joint, however, where flux is not really needed. This, you're going to whack it and everything's going to get all the flux, all the scale or iron oxide is going to get pushed out of this joint fairly easily without it getting trapped. So it is not necessary to use flux on this joint. I recommend you try one both ways and see which way that you like a little bit better. So without further ado, let's get this hot and then we're going to forge weld that down and that'll become the head of our ram. Have your hammer at the ready. Out we come. Now that's welded up, but we're going to take one more little welding heat on that. Take it up to a little higher heat, right in this area, and blend it in a bit better. Now that we've got the face welded up here, we're going to actually draw that material down into a nice short blunt taper. We're not going for very sharp. We just need to give the face a little bit of shape like a ram's snout, which is a one-sided taper or a three-sided taper. So it's going from this direction and from that direction out that way. And that's what we're going to blend that down. And that's going to, we're going to stop at about the thickness that we want for his mouth or his nose, if you will. So again, we'll draw this down in just a three-sided taper. All right, as we draw this muzzle down, we're going to keep it at a slight, I do mean a slight welding heat, just to get it where we want. Again, this is just a three-sided taper. Really short, really blunt. And this is just going to establish the ram's mouth and brow area and where we're going to punch in the rest of this stuff. Just like so. Do we see that? It narrows a little bit like this to the face. And down from on top. Just a small taper like that. Don't draw this out excessively long. The longer you draw this out, the more of a dragon this will become. We want to keep it fairly short to make a really nice ram's head here. So we're going to establish those facial facets by working over the horn. We're going to set it on the horn. That way we just have a nice radius to this. There's one side, there's the other. And I'm just working just ahead of the actual horn itself. So I'm hitting right in here, right where it blends in to the head. And this is going to create our areas where our eyes are going to end up getting sunken in. And now's your time where your face really starts taking shape. And if you need to take a look at a ram, that sometimes can be handy to do to get an idea of where you're going with this. Now, I'm no expert on making ram's heads. I do not make them realistic, generally speaking. I am more of a figurative smith. I like to just give the impression to the eye that it's a ram. So there you go. There's a reason why you can see we're getting stretched out there quite a bit. That's the reason why we don't want to draw this out real long, because by the time you put in the facial facets, you're going to end up with this really long snout. which we don't want. So now you can see a facial facet here and a facial facet here. Those don't have to be perfect or even symmetrical. It's nice to your OCD or to your eyes if both those facial facets are nice and even and come out at the right angles from each other, you know, on the head. But think about a ram's head. It's not perfectly symmetrical, and you know, their eyes aren't perfect and things like that. All right, so now that we've accomplished this mission, we're going to observe our piece, make sure all of our facets look the way we like them, where our facial facets are and things of that nature. And now we're actually going to start working on the face itself. And we will have to do that over at the vise. Okay, so here we are, folks, over at the vise. We're going to set our jaws to about a 1/2 inch in width, just a little over. So this way when we bring out the ram's head, it's going to fit nicely in here. We don't have to spend a lot of time monkeying around with tightening this up. I have also brought over my tools I'm going to be using, the eyeball punch, the center punch, and the slitting chisel. And I brought the hammer that I'm going to be using as well. So it's not necessary that you have an animal head block, which is one of those triangular shaped things, to go in the vise here to actually work upon, if you grip down close enough by the head while working. So we don't need this thing screaming hot when we come out. We do want it to be fairly warm though. And then we're going to grip this right down close by the head. And for those of you who are wondering, I have copper jawls in my vise to help prevent things from not only slipping, but from damaging or galling up the animal head. So I'm going to come in at a slight angle, and I'm going to drive an eye back into the socket here. Drop that down. Now we're going to start doing this, and then we will have to come in later and we will have to refine this. But I'm starting about half of the distance up at a slight angle, and then I'm driving that eyeball back and down inside the head. Think of this like an ice cream scoop. There's one. There's two. Okay. Pull this out now. Hopefully you all can see that well. So we drove from part way up the nose and we scooped this material back and set it into the eye socket. Now that we've driven in the eyeballs into the eye sockets, again gripping down close to the head, we're going to tilt this up nicely like so. I'm going to take a hammer, and I'm going to hammer 2 nose facets onto this guy right here and clean up the mouth. So we're just hammering a little facet for where the nostril is going to be, and we're cleaning up the mouth slightly. And we're letting this material kind of spread a little bit all on its own. So now I'm going to go ahead and use my center punch mark, and I'm going to drive in my nostril holes. Again, we're kind of coming back and from the front. So we're coming in at an angle, but then we're driving into the center core of the piece at first, and then we can adjust our angle to flare things out and around and do whatever we need to do here to push things around to make it look better for ourselves. Now, how much nostril flare you give this is completely up to you. I'm going to have to adjust this just slightly because I took a little bit of an overbite. Hammer on top a little bit. There we go. Clean up some of that nostril flare. Just like so. So now we're going to go ahead and work on the mouth. We're going to cut the mouth in just below the nostrils. We're just going to work it to each side. A little bit on the angle. A little bit on the other angle, just to give it the appearance of more depth. Make it look like he's kind of hollering out there. Gives a little bit more life to this face. Okay, now we're going to work on the horns. So I'm going to go ahead and lock this in the vise. And we're going to start by going ahead and splitting these apart now. I'm going to use a pair of scrolling tongs. You can use what you have at home in your own shop. Scrolling tongs are preferred. If you don't have scrolling tongs, you can go ahead and use yourself a pair of needle nose pliers. Scrolling tongs just have a nice radius all the way around. If you do use a pair of needle nose pliers, go ahead and grind off the inside portion of the jaws where it's nice and mechanically flat. Get rid of that so it doesn't leave any bite marks on your piece. Okay, so now with this one face right here, the way you see it, this can actually go a bunch of different ways. And this is the cool thing about doing animal heads. Right here we have a longhorn steer, we have a ram, we have pronghorns, we have basically any deer-like animal that has a singular horn set. Basically we have all that wrapped up in this facial structure. So everything I've done here to this point, you can turn that into anything you want. Deer, elk, moose, you name it. The only difference is the horns itself. This here can work like a pronghorn. This can be a longhorn, like a Texas longhorn. You could shorten these up, and this could just be like a standard cow. You could do a lot of different animals just by changing the horn structure of what we're doing. We're going to turn this into a ram, and so rams have spirally horns, and that's what they're known for. So that's what we're going to actually turn this into. But again, right now at this stage, you can turn it into all sorts of different animals. Okay, so I don't beat up the facial details, I'm going to use a rawhide mallet. If you don't have a rawhide mallet, you can use a wooden hammer. It's just as fine. I'm going to use this rawhide mallet as not to beat up my facial details, to actually bend this face into shape. Looks like I'm getting a small twist in that neck, so I'm going to end up needing to go to the vise and twist that back straight. Take my horns out nicely. The hardest portion of this process now at this point is actually making sure that your horns don't burn up in the fire. Again, we'll brush at the end of the heat. And I will go ahead and continue to bend this right on around with another heat or so. Okay, now with our scrolling tongs, we are going to go ahead and start scrolling these up. If I can turn this in a way that looks sensible to you. So we're going to play with this. You're going to have to do whatever feels good to you, or visually what looks good to you, what you envision a ram's horn to look like. There's not really a right and a wrong on this. Again, this is an animal, okay? So as you can hopefully see there, I'm doing it in the flat. Right now it's going above the head. Later on we're going to correct that and bring it down. This next one I'm going to do the exact same thing for. We'll brush her up real quick, just get any sort of extra yuckies off of there. Go ahead and get the other horn hot, do the same to the other side. I'm going to make sure I'm curling this in the same direction as the other one. They generally flow in the same direction. Most of these ram's horns do. So this is just all tweaking it to look right by your own needs. Said there's not really a right and wrong here. It's just what you, how you like to perceive a ram's horn to be. Again, we're not going for realism at this point. We're going for a figurative. So this way people can understand that, hey, that's a ram when they look at it at a distance. We'll get that head hot again. All right, for this last step, I'm actually going to bend these down. Bend these down, and that's going to give us that classic ram horn that we all know and love. Again, trying to bend this down. Might have to play with this a little bit to get the exact look you're looking for. I might have to do a little bit of additional bending to get what I want. But that is all preference at this point. Ooh, there we go. Ooh, I like that. That looks pretty darn smarvelous, if I do say so myself. Take that out a little bit and give it a little more radius right there. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. That looks good to me. So now brush her up. Now it's cooled down enough. Do not brush this at a bright red heat. You're just going to bend your horns around and you'll regret that you did. You need to brush this at a black heat. Get all these cleaned up. Get a good brushing on it. And I'll bring you all up close here in a second so you can see what that looks like. Okie doke, folks. So there you go. That is your classical ram's head. This is just the way that I make my ram's heads. You can make your ram's heads however you would like. Again, I'll link up all the playlists that I mentioned earlier in the video down in the description down below, so please check those out. Thank you to all the channel members that make this content possible. God bless each and every last one of you out there. And if you're interested in some blacksmithing blanks and things where some stuff's already cut and it makes nice hooks and things like that for you, please check out our website, www.blacksmithingblanks.com. And we always appreciate your support there. So without further ado, God bless each and every last one of you, and we will catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching.